One of the things that political pundits like to do is to put everything through a partisan lens. They always try and claim that the Republican Party is really great on an issue and the Democrats are terrible, or the Democratic Party is really great on an issue while the Republicans are terrible. And one of the difficulties of trying to view American politics that way is that so often the parties have almost entire complete agreement, not on ancillary issues, but on crucial and consequential ones. That was obviously the case for the war that has preoccupied American politics and journalism and discourse over the last 18 months, which is the proxy war in Ukraine to try and undermine Russia. There's no way to really divide that issue along partisan lines. Joe Biden's policy was to fully support Ukraine in its war against Russia, to give them all the arms and the money that they needed. And that was the vast majority of Republican politicians who also supported that policy. There were only a handful of Republicans, largely Trump supporting more populist Republicans in the House and a few in the Senate who were opposed to that war. But if you wanted to look for opposition, you really didn't find it among the establishment wings of either party, which were in full and complete agreement on that war. The same is true for this new war, for this war in Israel, that the United States has also, through Joe Biden, said it intends to fully fund and arm one of the belligerents, Israel, with no limitations until the very end of the war for as much as Israel needs. Exactly the same as what the Biden White House said for Israel. And that also was the view of essentially everybody in the Republican Party in Washington, with maybe a couple of exceptions, a few exceptions, but even more overwhelming is the bipartisan agreement on this war in Israel. There's no way you can try and, if you're a conservative who supports the war in Israel, try and attack Joe Biden because he's 100% on your side. And in fact, he's not just on your side now. Joe Biden, of all the politicians that have come and gone in Washington over the last 4 or 5 decades, has long been one of the most stalwart and vocal and devoted supporters of the state of Israel. And not just supporters of the state of Israel, but supporters of the American policy to provide more arms and more aid to Israel than any other country by far. And it's one of the things he has believed in consistently. He has never wavered in it, going back all the way to the 70s and the 80s through the 90s when he was vice president under President Obama, before he ran for president, when he ran for president, now that he's an American president. If you are a supporter of Israel, Joe Biden is absolutely 100% on your side. In fact, he's so much on your side that it's hard to find a politician in Washington more on your side than he when it comes to supporting Israel. Obviously, you have other people like Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and Chuck Schumer. Essentially, every politician in Washington is fully pro-Israel and has been for decades. But Biden has really taken the lead. In fact, he has scorned people in his own party, people in any party, who even question the idea that the United States should essentially, as he calls it, have no space whatsoever between the American government and the Israeli government, or that the United States should give Israel everything it needs. Let's just take a little look, a montage of Joe Biden over the years being extremely consistent, angrily supporting Israel against anyone who would question why we do. Let's take a look.
Those of us who support, as most of us do, about time, we stop those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
The second part is people should understand by now, this should be crystal clear, that Israel is the single greatest strength America has in the Middle East. I always say to my friends when they say those things to you, I say, imagine our circumstance in the world were there no Israel. How many battleships would there be? How many troops would be stationed? You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Progress occurs in the Middle East when everyone knows there's simply no space between the United States and Israel. There is no space between the United States and Israel when it comes to Israel's security. There is only one nation only one nation in the world that has unequivocally, without hesitation, and consistently confronted the efforts to delegitimize Israel. At every point in our administration, at every juncture, we've stood up on behalf of the legitimacy of the State of Israel.
The security of Israel and the United States is inextricably tied, and we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel out of our own self-interest.
I also emphasize what I've said throughout this conflict. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks from Hamas and other Gaza-based terrorist groups that have taken the lives of innocent civilians in Israel.
So that is essentially Joe Biden in every decade. That was Joe Biden as a senator, then Joe Biden when he was running for president, Joe Biden as President Obama's vice president speaking to AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, Joe Biden as a presidential candidate, now Joe Biden as president. Same message over and over and over. Israel is not just our ally, it is a country to which we owe undying, unlimited loyalty. And he hasn't just said it, he has backed it up with all kinds of policies. The very last thing that the Obama-Biden White House did on its way out, it did it in September of 2016, 2 months before President Obama left office, or 3, was signed a record-breaking deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu to vastly increase the amount of aid the United States gives to Israel every year, $3.8 billion a year. It's a 10-year commitment. And then on top of that, the United States has constantly given Israel much more money above and beyond that money as well, including now Biden wants to give another $14 billion to Israel for this new war. So whatever you want to say about Joe Biden, you cannot say with any degree of honesty that he has ever wavered in his full-fledged support for Israel. He sees Israel as a centerpiece of U.S. policy, the way most people in Washington have, which is why it has gotten more money and more aid than any country on the planet over decades, even as a lot of military officials have tried to warn that our support for Israel, especially in the Middle East, causes there to be a huge amount of anti-American sentiment, to increase the risk to American citizens as they travel. We've showed you all the travel warnings that Americans have received from their State Department over the past month as a result of the perception, not the perception only, but the reality that the bombs that Israel is dropping on Gaza come right from the United States, that we pay for those bombs, we give those bombs, those are American weapons being used. Everybody in the region knows that. And that's what Biden was saying. He said, even out of self-interest, we won't abandon Israel, meaning even if it harms the United States, our support for Israel, and harms American citizens, we're still going to be by Israel's side. Even if it's not good for the United States. That's how fervent of a believer he is. That's what he said in that video. And then since Israel was attacked on October 7th, he has repeatedly emphasized that he believes this even more. Here was the speech that he gave on October 10th, 2023.
For 75 years, Israel has stood as the ultimate guarantor of the security of Jewish people around the world, so that the atrocities of the past could never happen again. And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening. We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
And then, of course, Joe Biden flew to Israel to be by Benjamin Netanyahu's side and to promise him the same thing, full, unlimited support for as long as Israel needs it in this war. And then here is Biden as recently as November 10th, so just a few days ago, reiterating that he still believes exactly the same thing.
What are the chances of the Gaza ceasefire?
None. No possibility.
Any update on getting hostages out?
We're still optimistic.
Did you ask for a 3-day pause to Netanyahu?
You know, I've been asking for a pause for a lot more than 3 days. Yes.
Did you ask him to pause for 3 days to get the hostages out for that length of time?
I've asked for even a longer pause for some of it.
Are you, Mr. President, are you frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu that he has not listened more to some of the things you have asked him to do?
It's taken a little longer than I hoped.
So they occasionally push back a little bit, especially when polls start to show that younger Democrats in particular are starting, and Muslim voters, which they need from Michigan and other states, are starting to say, I'm not voting for Joe Biden because of his support for this war. But Benjamin Netanyahu knows, Israel knows, that Biden would never, ever accompany those requests, those pushbacks, with any hint that the United States would stop the flow of weapons or money to Israel no matter what it wanted to do. So just like when liberals or leftists stand up and say, I'm going to vote Democrat no matter what, my whole life, because Trump is so much worse that the Democrats have my vote forever, and even thinking about not voting Democrat is immoral, obviously those people are going to be ignored. They have no leverage. They've already said, no matter what you do, we're voting for Democrats, and no matter what. Why would any Democrat listen to the grievances or complaints or dissatisfaction of somebody who has already pledged their full and unconditional loyalty to that party? It's the same with Joe Biden in Israel. Netanyahu knows that Biden will never, ever, ever even think about withholding aid or weapons, and will give Netanyahu everything that he needs no matter what. So even if Biden says, we wish he would be a little bit less aggressive for a while to get some of the hostages out, and Netanyahu says, no, all the money and the arms are going to still flow. The White House has always been very clear about that. Here's John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman and national security aide, who spoke in the White House on November 11th, and that's what he was asked. Is there anything Israel can do, any line they can cross, that would cause the United States to withdraw support? Here's what Kirby said.
Is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines?
That is still the case.
Okay, and then in late October, you had referred to the fact that the administration is not drawing any red lines for Israel. As the death toll for civilians in the Gaza Strip has gone up, I wanted to ensure, is that still the case, that the administration has no red lines?
That is still the case.
Okay, and then
It's also true that airstrikes continue, and it's also true that civilians keep dying from these airstrikes.
But the U.S. has no red lines at all. Even if we think that Israel is starting to do things that harm the United States directly, like Joe Biden said, we will never, ever, ever, says the Biden White House, even consider withholding our arms or funds for Israel. They have that unconditionally for as long as they want, for whatever they want to do. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.